All right, so today we have Mrs. Flora Brown, illustrious Ph.D. entrepreneur, business owner. The list goes on. We can talk all day about accolades, but we want to inspire some people. We want to first get into who you are, where you're from, and how you got to where you got. So, where were you born?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri.
St. Louis, Missouri. Were you in a single parent household, two-parent household? Did you have both parents? How was your childhood like? What was your
My
child?
okay, I was had a two-parent childhood up until about age 13. So both of my parents were present. My mother was had her own business. She was a beautician. She had her own beauty shop, and it was set up where it was like the first room of the house, and then we lived in the second room was like the bedroom and the kitchen, and then the bathroom was actually downstairs. My father was actually retired at the time that my mother and father got married because he was a lot older than my mother. So while she was working during the day running the beauty shop and we were at school, he was really doing what they didn't even have a term for it back in the old days, but he liked to keep busy tinkering around. So he would actually be recycling. So he would like go through the neighborhood and different places, and he would pick up metal bottles, whatever you could take to the recycling place and get money back. This was a long time ago before recycling was even a term, but
What
it
year
was
was
his way.
this? What year
This
was this?
okay. I was born in 1944, so that would have been between 1944 and 1954 when he was doing that, and when my mother was running her beauty shop. My mother had a beauty shop throughout my entire childhood and my entire life, but the main period when my mother and father were together and we were all a family was probably 44 through 54, 1944 through 19.
That was a whole different world at that time.
Different, very different world. And you know what was interesting is in St. Louis and many other cities, there was segregation. And so
Absolutely.
we lived in a segregated neighborhood, all blacks. The only non-black people in my neighborhood were the store owners. So you had a major drugstore that was owned by a Jewish family, and he did have a couple of his employees were black, but he was the owner. And it was one of those old-fashioned drugstores that sold it had a whole counter that you could sit and order hot food like sandwiches, drinks, coffee, malts, and things like that. But it also had cosmetic counter. It had kind of odds and ends, whatnots. It had a big counter where they sold peanuts and candy and stuff like that by the scoop. Or, you know, when I was a kid, you could get 10 cents worth of peanuts and 10 cents worth of
Yeah.
jelly beans, things like that. So it was a big store. And then the neighborhood also had two movie theaters, two black movie theaters. They were owned by whites, but it was all black neighborhood. My school, my elementary school was about 2 blocks from my house. My high school was about 8 blocks from my house. So everything in my church was about 3 blocks from my house. So everything was close together. And even though people think that segregated community means bad, but in my case, it was not bad because the people worked together and pulled together and were encouraging. And our teachers, all of our leaders were always encouraging us to
Mhm.
get our education, to stay in school, and that kind of thing. So it was I felt very supported. Now, of course, there's always some bully kids or some kids trying to, you know, mess with you no matter where you lived. But for the most part, we felt safe in our immediate community.
I'm glad you said that about the segregation because I listened to like a lot of Malcolm X's like speeches and stuff like that, and I compare him and Martin Luther King and
Mm-hmm.
his whole thing about he considered himself a black nationalist,
Mm-hmm.
and he was actually for segregation for
Mm-hmm.
the exact reasons you're talking about right now, about how it wasn't necessarily like meant to, well, and at least in black people's eyes back then, I would assume like they probably weren't necessarily too worried about segregation because they had their community and they were thriving off of that. And then you just notice now there's like, we're speaking about entrepreneurism, and it's like there's like less of like black people being able to start businesses and do stuff like that. I think because we've lost that aspect of community and stuff like that. And you know, you got kids gang banging and all type of crazy stuff now these days, and it's not what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
but that was a really good point. That puts into perspective kind of what he was talking about. You
Yeah.
know, it's kind of like a yin and a yang, because we'll complain about segregation, and then on top of that, we'll complain about gentrification.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's
that's
kind
true.
of a yin and a
Or we're
yang.
complaining about integration,
Or
because
exactly.
the thing I want to say about that is I often hesitate to say that segregation was a good thing for us, but in many ways it was, in the sense that my teachers, all of my teachers, I never had a black teacher. I'm sorry, I never had a white teacher or a white classmate until I got to college. So what was good about that was that my teachers were very highly educated. Most of them probably came from the South, or, grew up in St. Louis too. But they were very hardworking, ambitious people, because keep in mind that in order to teach, they had to have their bachelor's degrees and they had to have teaching credential. So in order to get those degrees, they really had to work hard in school. And they had to overcome a lot of racial discrimination from wherever they came from. And therefore, they pushed us a lot. Whereas I think sometimes if you're in in an integrated setting where you have teachers from all different races, you're going to have, I'm not saying teachers won't be encouraging, but I think our Black teachers were more encouraging than the average. Because for one thing, right now there's arguments going about teaching what they call critical race theory. And
Yeah.
essentially they're talking about teaching students the full picture of what it was like from slavery to now. Well, our teachers automatically talked about
Yeah.
that stuff
Exactly.
because they knew that. And for a matter of fact, my elementary school was called Benjamin Banneker. So it was named after a Black man. So a lot of the things in our community, we grew up knowing about because our teachers it didn't have to be in the school curriculum. It
Exactly.
was in
It's personal. They're
it
telling you
was
this.
personal. They were
Yeah.
telling us their stories, and they were introducing us to leaders and people who were encouraging for us as Black kids. And the same with my church. My church had was all Black people. My pastor, my high school principal, they had PhDs when I was a little kid.
Wow.
And that's actually where I got the idea. And to show you how sometimes people don't realize this when they ask me, sometimes people will ask, well, typically it's a white person, will ask me, where did you get the idea to get a PhD? And I don't know that they go around asking other people that,
Exactly.
this day and age, right? But I tell them, well, actually, when I was a child, I loved school. I loved school so much. I loved to read. I loved writing. I just couldn't wait to start school. So when I started school, I would ask the teachers and I'd ask at my church, what's the highest degree you can get? Because in my mind, all I was thinking about was, what can I go after that'll keep me in school as long as possible? Because I just love school, which is not the normal kid, maybe, but that
Yeah.
was me. And so one of my leaders said, "Well, a PhD is the highest degree you can earn." And I said, "Oh, okay. When I grow up, I want to get a PhD." I had no idea what a PhD. I didn't know what the letters meant. I didn't know anything about it, except that I did know that the pastor of my church had a PhD. The superintendent of Sunday school had a PhD. The principal of my high school had a PhD. So they were very highly educated. Had that been in normal times, if things were normal in this world, and they could have applied for jobs all over the country without regard for race, they may not have been teaching in our schools. They may have been teaching somewhere else.
Yeah.
But because they would have been all over. Yeah, they would have been all over. But because of segregation, we had the very highly educated, very hardworking, very ambitious leaders, teachers, and they were very serious about educating us to value education and to pull ourselves up, as they say, by your bootstraps and work hard and that kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean every kid got that message,
Exactly.
but I'm just talking about what the leaders were consistent about it. So it doesn't matter whether it's the school nurse, the principal, your teacher, or the janitor. They all were pushing us to do our best and be our best. So that side of segregation was good because we had a very tight-knit community that encouraged one another and looked out for one another. If you were walking home from school and there were always a couple of older ladies who were retired and they're sitting on their porch or they're inside their living room looking out the window as the school gets out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything you did on your way home, your mother knew about it by the time you got there. So if you and your friends are walking down the street and you pick up a rock and throw it at somebody or whatever, when you got home, your mother already knew. And it's like, why were you throwing rocks when you were coming home? And you go, what? How did you know that? Oh, Mrs. Jones saw you when you passed her house. She said you were throwing rocks, and you wouldn't dare as a kid say, no, I didn't, or what, what's she doing? She's nosy. Why would she know? You just fessed up and just been more careful next time.
Or when you say that you love to go to school, do you ever feel like school might have been an escape from you for get away from home, since there's always an active business going on or something like that?
No, not for me, because I enjoyed. But when I was only at home full time up until about 4.5 years old, because school, I think I was born in May. So the way my birthday fell, I would not have started school for a whole nother year. But I wanted to go to school, not to get away from home. I wanted to go to school because I would see kids passing my door when I was a little kid. Passing, going to school, the big kids, the high school kids, and they were carrying all these books. And I would ask my mother, what are they doing? What are they carrying? And she said, oh, they're on their way to school. Those are their books. And to me, as a little kid, it looked like they had a zillion books. And I had some books at home too, because my mother was always she was always thinking about what things she could buy for us that would help us become, knowledgeable. So we had books, but because she was a beautician and her customers would often bring us things from wherever they worked, we always had plenty of books, papers, pencils. So I wanted to go to school because I wanted to learn what was in those books. And when I found out that in the books was a whole nother set of lives that you could learn about. And so, and not just the community I was in and the life I was living, but I could read books and find out about all kinds of ways that people were living all around the world. That was exciting to me. And it made me want to travel, later when I got grown, because otherwise, you're growing up everybody's growing up in a limited community wherever you are growing up. And if you aren't reading, and we didn't have a television, Victor, until I was about 13 before we got a TV. And TVs were invented, but they were still very, very new. And they were little small screens, and very expensive. And my mother was the kind that she didn't mind buying something like that, but she was very cautious with her money. So she didn't just jump out and buy the first time something new comes out.
Yeah.
She would wait until it was, a little more developed and she had to research it. And so we didn't have a TV. So we read books, we played games, we played outside, and we also would have for Christmas and things, we get, they still make that little thing. There's a thing that you put a little, what do they call, a little disc in it that had little images and you click them, Viewmaster or something it was called.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, so all of those things is what we had for entertainment. But yeah, no, I didn't feel like I was getting away from home because when I was at home, remember my mother had a beauty shop in the front room. So I loved being home up until a point. By the time I was a preteen and going into teenage years, and then I'm interested in boys by then, right? So now I definitely want to be out and doing other stuff. But when I was at home, I would be listening to the ladies talk. And that to me was like a whole education because women in the beauty shop, they would be asking my mother questions. And so I would be listening to their conversations. And honestly, it was really a time that I started to formulate how I wanted to live my life. When I would listen to the women complaining about their husbands and about their different restrictions, things they thought they couldn't do because of this and that, I would be listening. I couldn't answer back. I couldn't ask questions because kids were supposed to not even be listening to adults. What did they have this saying? You're seen and not heard. You're supposed to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that way I could sit in the next room and just be quiet and listen to them talk. And that's where I started to formulate how I wanted to live my life, number one. And number two, my father took us to the movie theater every single Saturday of my childhood. He would take me and my two sisters to the movies, and we would stay in the movies from the time the theater opened till it closed. And we would see they would show lots more stuff. Nowadays, you just go see one movie you're paying for. But in those days, we'd see two big movies, we'd see cartoons, we'd see what they call newsreels. And we'd be in the theater pretty much all day. So between listening to the customers, reading, and going to the movies, I started to decide how I wanted to live my life. So I started to decide when I get grown, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And so no, I did not feel like getting away from home was escaping, but certainly in school, for me, it was fascinating because I could stay at school all day. I loved school.
Yeah, that's why I asked that, because it seems like you thrive at school. Like that's a comfortable place for you.
It is, yeah.
Also, I wanted to ask, what were your duties at home when you were helping your mom with your business, or did you have any duties, or did she just let you be a regular kid?
A regular kid has duties. Yeah, our main duties at home were our home chores were washing dishes, putting food away, sweeping, mopping. I don't remember mopping that much. My mother probably did that, but changing your linen on Saturdays, just the basic chores in the house part of it. In the beauty shop, she pretty much didn't want us in there tinkering around and doing stuff.
Yeah, in the way type stuff.
No, because she took care of that. But as I got a little older, I did try to convince her to let me help in the beauty shop, like wash somebody's hair or do something. She didn't play that because she was very serious professional. And no, I couldn't do that. But what I could do, I did get my entrepreneurial start in the beauty shop, Victor, because it just made me think about anything that the customers were like an extended family. the ladies who came to the beauty shop were like an extended family. Many of them were middle-aged, older, some were retired, and some were still working, young professionals, but they tended to be like a second family. So when they would come, they would greet me and my sisters. My sisters, Mildred and Sonia, they pretty much stayed away from the beauty shop as I can remember. Now, if they were here telling their side of it, you'd have a different story. But Mildred, for sure, she loved the out of doors. So as soon as she could, she was outside riding her bike, and she would disappear for hours at a time. We didn't know where she was. But I found out that the customers were a source of not only encouragement, but income. Because every time I would learn some new little craft, like we'd go, my mother would always send us to stuff like the YWCA, or during the summer, church would have a vacation Bible school and all these things. And all these activities would always have crafts, part of the, learning how to make something, how to embroider, whatever I'd learn how to make, I'd make some extra ones after I learned the basics. And then when my mother's customers would come, they would always be one or two sitting around waiting their turn, because they would come early. The older ladies would come early. So their appointment may not be for an hour, hour and a half. They would come early so they could visit, with my mom and chit chat. And while they were sitting around, I'd say, Miss So-and-so, look at the new pot holder I just made. And they go, oh, that's beautiful, baby. I like those colors you put together. I think I'll buy one of those. How much are they? 25 cents for one and so for three, start my little entrepreneurial business. And so whatever I was learning to make at wherever I was taking it, I would be selling it at the beauty shop. And then some of the ladies were always encouraging us about school. So they would say, how are you doing at school? Let me see your report card. And if you have A's in your report card, some of them would give you whatever. I don't remember how much, a quarter, whatever it was like a lot of money to a little kid for each A and things like that. So I was getting money for grades, for good grades. And I was also making money for the different little things that I would sell.
So you were at it already young. I kind of have similar stories like that with me and my brother Anthony. We were selling hot Cheetos and stuff like that at school.
I remember
Anthony
that.
Actually was much better at it than me. In high school, they actually called him Burger Boy. That was his nickname, because early in the morning he would go buy burgers from either McDonald's or Carl's Jr. or something. They're like $1, and he goes to school and he sells them for $3. And it's just like he's tripling his money, and he sells out every day. He's tripling his money because the kids, they want Carl's Jr.'s. The school now, like, they can't serve that type of stuff. They have to serve you in school. So he has a bag full of burger, and he actually got that because the other school we were going to, we like to play basketball. We had to sell McDonald's breakfast sandwiches to buy our shoes and stuff like that. So he just took that idea and he was like, I'm gonna do this for me and keep the money. And he walked around with a pocket full of animals, called him Burger Boy, because he wanted to buy nice clothes and all those,
I remember hearing about that. That were kids. I don't think we were doing that when I was in school, but after I became a teacher, some of the junior high kids were doing that same kind of thing. Hey, baby. Hey, man. Hey, man.
I'm already trying to mess with stuff. Here, take this. Yeah. All right. So how about when you left St. Louis? What made you leave St. Louis? And was it school?
Okay, first of all, I had an older brother who was about 16 years older than I was. He had a different father. When my mother and father moved to St. Louis from Arkansas, they had me shortly after they moved there. And for 1 year, my brother came and lived with us and went to high school. But once he finished high school, he joined the Army. And once he joined the army, once he got out of the army, he moved to California. And when he moved to California, he and his wife, um, he started trying to lure the rest of the family to move to California also. And so all of my childhood, he was trying to convince my mother to move to California. He finally convinced my uncle, who was, I think, still in Arkansas. He convinced my grandparents, who were still in Arkansas, over the years. But he didn't convince my mother for a long time because she had her own business. She was very successful at church, and she played the piano and organ at church. So she was an entrepreneur in a sense too, because she was making money with her music on the weekends. And so she wasn't interested in moving to any place because her life was very organized and, structured. And so she wasn't interested. But eventually, when my youngest sister, Mildred, had a child, when she was still a teenager, my mother started to think maybe it would be a good idea for her to relocate because in her thinking, we would be in a different environment. And my brother had, made this case for decades about all the opportunities, how much better the schools are, and all this kind of thing. So after 1 year, when I graduated from high school, I went to college 1 year in St. Louis, and we moved to California that next year. So my mother was motivated to move mainly to find what she thought was a better situation, mainly for my youngest sister, but for all of us. My middle sister was not too much of a consideration because she had met her husband when she was 16, 15, 16, and they got married as teenagers. And eventually she went to Germany because he was in the service. So eventually she went and started living with her husband in Germany. But it was mainly because my brother had been in my mother's ear for so long about the opportunity. So we moved to California, and I was thrilled that we moved to California, to tell you the truth. Oh, I loved it compared to St. Louis, which, well, because St. Louis compared to Los Angeles was so much smaller and, not as many seeming to me opportunities. So when we moved to Los Angeles, I was starting my second year of college. And now I had a huge number of opportunities and choices to make that I didn't have in St. Louis. And everything was bigger and more spread out and more opportunities and a variety of food. I'd never in my life had a taco or all that kind of thing in St. Louis. And I loved that she moved to Los Angeles because it just opened up so many other things in my life that I didn't know about in St. Louis.
All right. So where'd you go to school for college?
Okay, for my first year of college was in St. Louis. I got a scholarship to the Teachers College. So I went there the first year. Then we moved to California, and I wanted to go to UCLA for my second year of college in California. But I did not apply in time because I didn't understand the timing of how you had to apply so early. Because all we were focusing on that summer was getting packed and moving. So I thought, when I get to California, then I'll enroll in school. Well, I didn't realize you couldn't just jump and enroll in school like that. So when we got to California, it was August of the year. And I inquired about, because my mother had never been to college at that time, she said she would always tell me, you go and find out all the details and let me know, and then bring me the information, and then we'll figure out how we can afford for you to go to college. So I got the information about UCLA. Well, I found out right away it was way too late to enroll for that school year. So I decided, okay, I definitely never considered not going to school. So I was talking to I was talking to my mother, and my brother and my grandmother were listening. And my grandmother said, well, there's a college called, I don't know if she even knew the name of it, but it was LA City College. And she said, you could go there and it's free. And at that time, city colleges, community colleges were free. You had to pay something like a $6 registration fee, but you weren't paying for the number of units you were taking. You were just paying registration. And then you did have to buy your books. But so when my mother heard that it was going to, because my mother was very frugal. So when she heard that I could go to school free and it would be low cost, she was all for that. And but we didn't know where it was because we were living in South Central Los Angeles, right near the Coliseum, about 6 blocks from the Coliseum and from the Rose Garden and from USC campus, right? And yeah, but it was also a very prestigious area because of because USC was there. And the science, I don't know if the Science Museum was there at the time, National History Museum, the Coliseum, and then down a little further the other direction, the sports arena. So it was really a very popular area because there were always big events and so forth. But at that time, we didn't know that. We just moved there.
And you never know you're in the ghetto when you're a
kid. Yeah. And what happened was when my mother found out the LA City was free, she said, okay, well, you need to go down there and check it out. Well, I didn't have a car. She didn't have a car. And but my grandmother lived right next door to my grandmother was a guy my exact age. So my mother said, well, my next door neighbor has a son your age. Maybe he can take you down there and you can find out information about that college. So fortunately, he had a car. So he took me down there to LA City, and I got their schedule and decided I was going to go there, even though that was a long distance for me, not having a car. But I could get on the Main Street, Vermont, and I could take one bus all the way down there. And that was almost to Hollywood going down there.
It's still like
that's
what. That's funny. Yeah. I used to take that bus.
Yeah. And I mean, it's convenient. So, and I was young, so you take the bus, you get off, and you're at school. So that's what I did. I looked at the schedule, and even though I already planned to be a teacher, that was my plan. But when I saw that schedule at LA City College, I got so excited because unlike St. Louis, where the colleges had what seemed like limited choices of majors, that LA City had a theater arts department. And I loved acting. So, but I didn't want to necessarily be an actress, but I thought this is an opportunity for me to learn about acting. So he said, oh, that sounds pretty funny. So I enrolled in theater arts. And when you enroll in theater arts, you really are taking a whole full program, not just one little class. So I enrolled in theater arts. So for 1 year at LA City College, I put aside my plan to be a teacher, and I took everything they had in theater arts. So I had beginning acting, voice development, stagecraft, costume design, you name it, everything. And then the second semester, I took the intermediate levels of the same courses. But by the end of that first year, that one and only year I went to City College, now I've finished 2 years of college, right? Now I got to make a choice, because are you going to follow your dream of being a teacher, or are you going to jump ship and go into acting? So some of us were considering going into acting, and we even went up to Hollywood to see if we could register for the equivalent of the union, to get into, so you could get parts and so forth, get called for auditions. And somewhere in that process, I decided that acting was not going to be for me. And also at the same time, I had to apply to wherever I was going to go for the next school year. I had to apply early. So instead of UCLA, which had been my plan, when I found out that USC was 6 blocks away, well, let's say when my mother found out how close USC was to our house, she said, no, you're going to go over there and check out USC. And my brother told her, well, USC is extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. And my mother said, well, that part doesn't matter. We need to find out the details. And so she sent me over there one day, said, go over there and get all the information and then bring it back and we will figure it out. That was her way of saying that, if it's something that was worthwhile to her, she was going to figure out how to do it. So I went to USC, got the information, and came back, and I told her, whoa, their tuition, I can't remember exactly now what it was, but it was very expensive. Well, it still is, but it was $36 a unit or something that was totally out there, and a full load is 16 units. So I told her whatever the price was and the books and this was going to cost. And so she said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go and enroll, and I'm going to pay for it for the first semester. But as soon as you get registered and get situated, you're going to go and find out what scholarships, grants are available to see if you can find, a way to help pay for your schooling. And we'll just take it, semester by semester, we'll figure it out. And I think it was like $600. I can't remember now, but whatever amount she gave me. Can you imagine somebody who has worked hard all her life? She saved all this money, and she gives me the money enough to pay for my tuition, my books, for one of the most expensive universities in the country, out of her pocket. And she said, put this money in your bosom, and she said, and don't tell anybody, especially your grandfather, how much it costs to go there. Because she said, in his mind, that would have been crazy to spend that kind of money to educate a girl. Because he thought he was still really old-fashioned.
That to be a homebody.
Girls should, you get married and have children, but to spend that on education wouldn't have made sense. But partly because he hadn't been educated. He had been working all his life. He had his own business when my mother was growing up. So, it was a whole different mindset. So I told her no problem. And she didn't have to worry about, me getting to school, because I could walk down there across Vermont, cut across the Rose Garden, and cut right into school over there off Exposition. That was my little route. And so that's how I got into USC. And as soon as I got in, I did start researching, and I found a loan that would pay for my entire rest of my education, because I wanted to be a teacher. They had a special program for people who wanted to be teachers. And if you finished all your coursework and got a job as a teacher, you would not have to start paying back the loan until you got a job. So I got to finish paying for all the rest of my education, including my credential, all as a loan. And then once I finished and I started teaching, I started paying it back. And if you paid on time, each year your loan got reduced. So I ended up not even having to pay the whole thing back because I paid on time. So I got a wonderful opportunity to finish school at USC because of that.
Was credit like a factor back then? Like, did that loan help you build credit?
Probably, but I wasn't thinking like that in those days. My mother was the one that took care of the finances and the credit. And as a kid or a young adult, I had to start learning those things. on
Oh,
my
okay,
own.
okay.
Yeah, I
That's
wasn't
really
thinking
interesting.
about that at all.
That she was very supportive and is a big part of your success and your achievements when I just she
Yeah,
literally helped you through to get to start you off at USC. Well, that's major. That's
yeah,
very
that's major. And the thing is, I think she was very supportive if because I was doing something that she condoned and she approved of. If I'd been wanting to do something, that she didn't approve of, I don't know to what extent she would have been supportive. So you have to think about that side of it. If I had told her that I think I'm going to forget
maybe if you would
about
have
being
told
a
her you're an
teacher,
actor,
I'm going to get into acting and
she
I'm going
probably
to,
like
she might not have supported that because, actors, you're going to be going to
you have to
auditions for
struggle for
many,
a
many,
while.
many years for a little while, unless you're extremely fortunate. But I knew that acting wasn't going to be my primary love. I loved working in the theater. And I loved, actually, I loved kind of behind the scenes more than I did acting. But the part of acting I didn't like was the um, following directions.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, when you're performing and the director, because when we were taking classes, the directors, they had ongoing plays all the time, and there are a number of people now who are famous who were in school when I was there, and they took classes for years. They weren't there to get a degree, they were there to get the experience and work with those particular teachers. But when we would be acting in our classes and doing different scenes, many times the director would say, okay, do that scene over. And you do it over and over and over. And finally he says, okay, perfect. That's the feeling I want. Do that again. And I'd go, what did I do? You've got to figure out what you did. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
And you've got to be very intuitive and, you've got to really, really, really want that in order to do that. So, and very competitive world trying to compete at auditions and things. So I decided that I was going to, that's why when I finished that year, I'm very grateful for that year. I had a good time. But I decided that I'm going to go back to my teaching goal. And I decided I can always act. I can. I think part of any kind of job, if you're in a career, part of it, you're going to be performing
Absolutely.
in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I decided that I didn't want that to be my full-time career. I admire people who go into acting and as a career with that being their goal because it's a very hard world for many reasons.
Yeah, it's definitely an emotional. You got to do a lot of motions and go through. But the same thing with entrepreneurism, or is you put in your money and your time on the line, and you don't know if it's going to work out. I think
Yeah.
that's people's biggest what makes them not do something that they have an idea is the process, the emotions, and the negative thoughts that you have to expel out of your brain. I think that's the hardest part for people because your subconscious is gonna do whatever you tell it to do. You just simply have to give it the command.
That's
And
right.
remind yourself over and over again, and the things you want and the things that the goals you set, they come to you naturally. It's like when you're driving, you're not driving telling yourself, now I'm turning left, now I'm turning right. Now you're
Yeah.
just doing it.
That's after you've gotten used to driving. When you're first
Exactly.
learning
That's
it, yeah,
exactly
when you're first learning it,
when you're first
you
learning, you are telling yourself and
that's
commanding.
right. You have to watch every little thing.
Eventually your subconscious thing, and that's the process that people they think is more. I'm actually just learning that. It's
Well,
literally just doing it, and everything is just a moment in time. It's just not like the end all, like I get mad at myself too, like, oh, I don't have a microphone, I don't have a camera, I don't how can I record somebody? Just do it, man. Everything
well,
is
let me tell you, that's what I love about modern times, being an entrepreneur right now. I love the fact that, when I was growing up, and that's one of the disadvantages of coming from my generation, the leaders what's the word I wanted? They emphasize practicing and being perfect. Having everything polished and perfect before you go on stage or before you get up and do a speech at church or before this and that. Well, I love the fact that the modern generation are willing to try something even if they don't know what they're doing, and learn along the way and not be all bent out of shape if you make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that, if you get into certain high level worlds, if you get into high fashion, or if you get into serious acting and certain performances, that the directors and people there can be very hard nosed about it. But as an entrepreneur, when you have your own business and you're learning, fortunately, there's room for you to be spontaneous and make mistakes. And the people judging you now, your potential customers, I don't think are as demanding as they used to be in the old days. As a matter of fact, I think people kind of like when you're spontaneous, or just like when your son came in there and climbed in your lap. In the old days, oh my gosh, people would have been freaking. Oh, they would have locked they would have locked that kid and chained him into another room. Whereas nowadays, I think people are a lot more open about it because they recognize you're a real person. You're
It
a real
gives them
father.
permission to
It gives
do
them,
that as well.
well, and it shows another side of you that you have some humanity, and it shows that you're doing a variety of things, that not just your business. It gives you a softer side and a more makes you more humane and caring. So I love that about modern entrepreneurship. But my age group, our problem is we got to constantly fight the old way that's in our heads of doing. When I get ready to I got on TikTok recently. I started making TikToks and Instagram reels. And some of my friends said, I can't believe you got on TikTok. I said, how did you learn? I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I get on there.
I don't either.
I don't know. I jump on there and I listen to video, YouTube about how to do this and how to do that. But after you get through listening to all of that, and then you jump on and do your own thing, you still are new at it. So you still don't quite know what you're doing. And you got to be willing to make mistakes and look silly or look inexperienced. Okay, fine. And that's one of the things that's cool about modern entrepreneurs. But you also have all of these opportunities thanks to the internet. You have such a wide reach that you can learn from, and you also can make changes faster. In the old days, you invest in something and you feel like you had to see it all the way through, no matter how many years it took. Whereas nowadays, if you start something and you try a project and it didn't work, you can switch gears, you can pivot, you can do it a little differently next time, and you don't have to wait as long to make changes. So I love that.
Boom. All right. Next thing I wanted to ask you, after college, what was your next step? Did you immediately get into, let's get into the family aspect of how you met your husband, how many kids you had,
Okay.
let's get into that.
The personal stuff. Okay. When I finished college, and keep in mind, I had to do a 5th year to get a credential. When I finished that, I went straight into, I was fortunate to get a teaching job. And I started teaching junior high English, my first job. And I was still single. I can remember that at that time, principals and many employers, but especially schools, were a little leery about hiring married teachers. Back in the old days, when I was growing up, many teachers were single. Because they thought, well, the whole male-female thing, they thought that women were too emotional and they should be either a housewife or choose a career. You couldn't do both. And so it was unusual for you to have, especially in the older days, a teacher who was married and had children. So when I started teaching, there was still a little bit of that in the schools, but I was still single when I first started teaching, so that wasn't a factor. But after I taught for 2 years, I met my husband through a blind date. One of my girlfriends invited me, and by
That's how it
then,
happens for a lot of people, believe it or not.
yeah,
Just who you're
well,
around.
it's who you're around, and also by 2 years later, from I've been teaching for 2 years and enjoying my life. I had moved out of my mother's house, got my own apartment, and living on my own. But within 2 years, now my biological clock is ticking because I always wanted to have a family. And I wanted to do it the traditional way, and that is get married and have children. But I hadn't focused on it. But by the end of the 2 years, then when she introduced me to my husband, I immediately liked him, but not fell in love, head over heels in love with him. But I was able to check off a number of things off my list of that I wanted in a guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, kind of basic stuff, but a kind, loving person, somebody I didn't have to worry about being insecure to the point where he thought he needed to control me, and educated, and level of culture in terms of his experiences, in his life. So I didn't take me but, a few seconds before we were together. And I'm trying to remember April. I think I met him in April. And so by September, I was not only, I was pregnant and we got married.
You guys went fast, huh?
Yep, bam, bam, bam. And I was so ecstatic because I felt, that this was like a piece of my life that was my goal that I hadn't done yet. So
it's like a milestone.
Yeah, it was another thing that I wanted to do in my life and I hadn't focused on it. So when I got married, that at first I thought I would stay off. I took a maternity leave. So that third year that I would have been teaching, I started off by taking a maternity leave. And I'd been teaching 2 years, so I knew I could take a leave and go back when I finished. So I took a whole year off. But as soon as I took that year off and I was home pregnant and my husband goes off to work, I started really, really, really missing school. Let me tell you, I would see kids walking by the picture window at my house, and I would feel like I was so missing out on what was going on in this world because I wasn't going back to school also. So I told my husband, I said, I'm thinking that maybe I will do some substitute teaching this semester instead of, just be home 24/7. And he was like, what? He said, you took off to, because you're pregnant, you want to focus on that. And I said, yeah, but I'm really missing school. But I think our Black teachers were more encouraging than the average because, for one thing, right now there's arguments going about teaching what they call critical race theory. And essentially they're talking about teaching students the full picture of what it was like from slavery to now. Well, our teachers automatically talked about that stuff because they knew that. And